So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell if it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Kent with Bent 55. Kent Hardly Wait. I am here, of course, as always, with my co-host, Benthoven. Now, I know that people were expecting Eric with Erica today, and that was what was scheduled. Yeah, that was what was scheduled. However, Erica is off helping family, and it is taking longer than she had expected. She was expecting to be back at her apartment by now, and that is not the case. So she doesn't even have a microphone with her. So as a result, we are instead doing a Kent with Bent. I will get with her and see if we want to just not do Eric with Erica this month, or if we want to do it next week, or whatever. But depending on what's happening, next week will either be the cryptid tier list or Eric with Erica, depending on what she wants to do. And then the week after will probably be the one that didn't happen next week. So the Tuesday schedule is a little bit in flux here. Bent, how are you today?
Oh, you cut out just a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bent, how are you today?
Oh, I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm having a pretty good day. Let's see, we got a whole lot of audio stuff done today, and I'm going to finish up the video hopefully tomorrow, and then my patrons will have access to it hopefully from tomorrow evening. So if you're a patron or a channel member, look forward to early access to a video. It's going to be about a half hour long. Yeah, it's going to be about some Creation Ministries International stuff. So that's enough getting started stuff. Let's talk about the rules. Because we do in fact have a drinking game here on Kent with Bent. We do not encourage that anyone play it because we take absolutely no responsibility or liability for any damages to yourself, property, death, destruction, any of that stuff. So that you play this at your own risk. But if you do want to play along, we have some rules. So first rule is that we drink whenever Kent Hovind gets something right, when he's not just quoting someone. Now, he actually usually does get a few drinks out of this, and we're fairly generous with it. So it does happen. Next, we drink when it's basically just too stupid, and we just kind of have to, or it'll hurt too much. Next up, we drink when, let's see, Kent Hovind tells a joke that doesn't land. And we drink when, let's see, one of us makes a prediction that comes true about Kent Hovind, what he's about to say next. We also drink for a few guys like Godzilla or Mothra who like to come by every once in a while. And that might be happening any time now, just as a demo. There it is. Okay.
Everything's perfect.
So, without further ado, I think... Oh, we all forgot. We also drink for things that didn't happen, or hashtag shower thoughts that Kent Hovind has imagined are real stories. Yeah, we just keep adding new drinking rules, but at least none of them are like whenever Kent gets something wrong, because, I mean, my goodness. We would die. But, yeah, here we go. In case you guys don't remember, we were talking about whether or not Egyptian chronology can be lined up with Noah's flood. Kent Hovind seems to think it can, like the entire rest of the world and all of Egyptology seems to think it can't. So.
Plus, there were instances where you have several pharaohs at the same time, like they're having a civil war and the kingdom breaks up into feuding factions, but they all are counted as pharaoh, but yet they're all pharaoh at the same time. But when it ended up in the history book, they put them in chronological order.
Yeah, see, that isn't actually what always happened. A lot of times when one dynasty managed to regain control of both Upper and Lower Egypt, they kind of did things like try to as much as possible erase the lines of other pharaohs. Yeah, if anything, Egyptians had a tendency to erase history rather than double up on history. Most famously, the entire reign of Akhenaten was stricken from all records, and his face and name were defaced everywhere it appeared in places where the buildings couldn't just be dismantled. And his new capital city that he built was completely abandoned. And only in some tucked away tombs that no one bothered to unseal do we actually have like his actual name and face and stuff. And so we've had to piece together bits of his reign from things like that, as well as some of the buildings that he built. One side would be carved, sorry, but the other sides wouldn't be, and so they would use some of the same stone blocks, but turn them so that the carvings were on the inside. And since some of those other buildings that were built after have toppled, now we have actually some inscriptions that we can piece together. So yeah, the Egyptians don't have all that much of a history of doubling up on reigns, but they do have a history of just erasing reigns. So yeah, there you go.
Well, this stretches the calendar out farther than it actually should be. It's very close to impossible to get accurate dates in secular history beyond about 1500 BC.
That's kind of true. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a quick drink for that, for being kind of true. So it is true that from history, it's hard to get accurate dates the farther back you go. And right around, like 5,000-ish years, we stop being able to really get a good handle on exactly when things are happening from history. However, we do have other dating techniques that help us know when areas like Egypt or Mesopotamia or whatever were actually settled. So we have things like, what is it? Oh, I can't remember it. I couldn't remember it last time either. But basically, you can take pottery, and when pottery is fired, it excites the electrons in some of the atoms in the pottery. And if they're then left in the dark, the electrons will slowly decay. However, if they're put in sunlight, it'll reset this clock. So based on basically how bright the ambient light shed by these things is, you can actually get a good idea of how old it is, and that is a minimum age, not a maximum age. Any contamination or resetting of the clock will make the pottery appear younger. So if you find a pot that has been inside of a cave and you do a test on it and it says, oh, this pot has been here for, 8,000 years, that's the minimum. So there you go.
It's very difficult even to look at the Exodus. The Exodus was about 1400 BC, when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt. And people argue about the exact year, and I don't know, get into all those kind of discussions, but the fact is it's very difficult to get accurate secular histories before 1500 BC.
Well, you know how things that didn't happen is going to be one of our drinks? Well, yeah. The Exodus is basically just a thing that didn't happen. So...
Are we drinking for it then?
Yeah, I just did. So here's the thing, right? The Exodus, there is literally no physical evidence of anything near the numbers reported in the book of Exodus wandering through the Sinai desert for 40 years. Especially since, by the way, it's not a 40-year journey. You have to go in circles for years and years and years.
Yeah. Isn't it like a 6-month journey or less?
Yeah.
Or something like that?
Basically, you have to intentionally wander around for 40 years in order to wander around for 40 years. You're in the course of 40 years, you're likely to just accidentally stumble onto Canaan if you're just wandering randomly through the Sinai. But again, there's no material artifacts, and the closest we can come is there is an Egyptian inscription that has been interpreted as lending some support to the idea that there was a Semitic group that people have identified with the Hebrews that were nomadic and lived in the Sinai Peninsula. Like, that's it. So it's yeah, there's really nothing to it. So yeah, it's just a thing that didn't happen. Now then you can say, well, where did the story come from? Well, obviously it's in the book of Exodus, and so the book of Exodus was written during the Babylonian exile. And while it definitely drew on earlier oral traditions, what it's also doing is giving a foundational myth to the Hebrew people, and it's giving them a description. It's part of their national history of a time of bondage similar to the one they were experiencing during the Babylonian exile. And God lifted them out of that, and so he'll lift you out of this. It's a way to keep both a ethnic kind of coherence by creating this myth that they can all draw from, as well as giving them hope of an eventual return to freedom. So yeah. And there you go. Here we go. We'll keep going.
3,500 years ago. So there certainly is no proof from secular history or from written language that there's anything more than 4,400 years old.
Well, your Chinese calendar itself is more than 4,400 years old, Ken. It was earlier in this video. We showed the Chinese calendar going back 4,600 something years when he made this video. So, I mean, there is a calendar older than that, according to you. But the other thing is, we don't need written history. There's no reason to think that humans started living in these places around the same time that they started writing. In fact, we know they didn't. We have Proto-Egyptian and Proto-Mesopotamian cultures. We have archaeology going way back beyond the invention of writing in all of the areas where writing eventually developed.
I don't think Kent believes that. I think Kent thinks that Adam and Eve were writing things down and reading to each other and stuff like that. I think that's what Kent believes.
You know, he might.
I don't know, but I think that's what he believes. He kind of acts that way, right? Or that, like, Noah from the Ark, like, that they could read and write. I'm sure they could, but...
TC the Unbeliever says the Bible is anti-Semitic. It says the Hebrews were stupid. Well, I mean, if you take the Exodus story where they wander in the desert too literally, it would be hard to come to a conclusion other than that those people had to have been stupid. Now, you could say, oh, God was going to strike them down if they left or something, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I think that they say God was leading them into the wilderness as like a punishment for 40 years because they were, I don't remember.
They were rebellious.
They were rebelling.
And there are in fact cave paintings which are well over 12,000 years old. Oh, and for $5 from Bob Knob, he says, my calendar only goes back to January 1st, 2021, so I don't believe anything that allegedly happened before that. Yeah, that's fair. That's an absolutely fair thing. Which is, again, one of the stupid things here is like, oh, all these calendars start here. It's like, okay, calendars are not the start of humanity inhabiting an area. People pick arbitrary days for the start of calendars, and in many cases, they pick days that are actually not real events. Like, many calendars go back to mythical first dynasties, like the Chinese calendar. The first Chinese dynasty almost certainly didn't actually exist. In fact, it's iffy if the second one did. So, and Tesla Ranger says, Moses didn't want to ask for directions, just like a man. Yeah. Good thing dinosaurs don't have that problem.
Except some of these exaggerated calendars like the Egyptian calendar, which stretches things out. Civilizations, the first really world empire was Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon.
I'm going to take a drink. For the time, Nebuchadnezzar had a pretty extensive empire. I mean, he conquered essentially all of Mesopotamia, Canaan. There were forays into Egypt, and to the east it contained like a bunch of what's now Iran, or what that would be called Persia. So yeah, but calling it a world empire, there really hasn't been a world empire since before like the British and Spanish empires, where basically they just had territories literally all across the globe. Now, in terms of actual extent of land, you're going to have to give it to Genghis Khan, who had a larger empire by landmass than even the British Empire. I believe, or it might have been up until that point. But either way, it was still very concentrated, whereas the British Empire had colonies all over Africa, Asia, North America, and even in Belize. So, yeah, it's... But then again, that's one of those things where it's like, what is it, an empire measuring contest? Like, who cares? I don't know why it matters, but Ken Hovind seems to think it does, so sure. But Nebuchadnezzar was... an early empire.
600 BC. Don't you think if man had been here for 3 million years, somebody would try to set up an empire before that?
No. I'm taking a drink. That's moronic. Okay, so in order to have an empire running, right, you need certain things. One is you need to have an efficient road and communication system. You need to have sufficient technology that you can divide labor and make it so you can afford to have people who are just doing administrative work who aren't starving. Because you got to remember, even after the agricultural revolution kicked in, it was still the case that virtually everyone had to be a farmer or they starved. It wasn't until farming techniques started to improve that you could get some people who could specialize as craftspeople, and then even later after that, that you could get people who could work in areas that were not directly productive for making food and things to make food or to directly survive. things like scribes and priests and things like that. Not that there wasn't religion before, but the idea of having someone whose job it was to just do that, that requires you to be making enough excess calories to support that person. And you can't just do that 3 million years ago when there was literally no farming techniques, where it took, you know, about 1,800 calories or so to gather 2,000 calories. Yeah. Oh, and for $5 from Vandelli 1998, too bad Neb didn't conquer the Assyrian Empire before that. Well, you know, we can't all be perfect. So, yeah, the fact is that empires are actually a great feat of technology. And you also, in many cases, even if you don't have to have writing, like we have the Incan Empire, right, where they didn't have writing, but they had an effective record-keeping system with the quipu, which are little, you have a little string, and then coming down off of it are further strings that have different knots tied in them. And the different style of the knot, and the different color of the knot, and the different material that it's made of all has some kind of information that's conveyed. And we don't currently fully understand how they worked, but they were clearly a method of record keeping. And that's what the earliest writing was too. If you look at the earliest writing in Sumerian, it's actually like Proto-Sumerian, and it's all about record keeping. So-and-so bought so-and-so so many cattle from such and such for this many talents of silver. This guy paid this many goats for taxes, stuff like that. You need that stuff, or you can't effectively administer anything but a small community. In fact, even getting to the point of a city is a pretty big step up in terms of just technological sophistication. Some of our earliest cities in like the Indus River Valley with the Harappan civilization, I mean, they didn't really get big until they had things like, you know, public squares and running water and toilets that actually, they weren't flush, but they were connected to a running water sewer system that was separate from the running water drinking system. I mean, it takes a lot of work to run just a city, never mind an empire. It's completely unsurprising that until people started developing the technologies that allow you to run an empire, that no one was. There's a reason why hunter-gatherers tend not to gather in groups that go much over 100 before they split off. It's because after about 100, it becomes hard to keep track of who everyone is and what everyone needs, and what everyone is doing to contribute. So, at least all in your head. So there you go. It's not at all surprising that empires don't go much past, you know, 4,000-ish years ago. The Venerable Bead says, Sumerians didn't have coins, they based wealth off of grain. That's not entirely the case. So at different points in their civilization, and you gotta remember, the Sumerian civilization lasts past the Sumerian Empire, because throughout most of the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia was a bilingual situation where you had Akkadian and Sumerian speakers living, in many cases, together or nearby. Oh, drink for Godzilla. And at certain various points in the ancient Near East, metallic units of value were in fact used to measure taxes. So, and of course it varies. And you could also do things like pay in things like livestock if you were primarily a rancher or something like that. So it's a little bit more complicated than just saying they just used wheat to value things. You got to remember that the Sumerian civilization lasted for something like, it was several thousand years. And over the course of that, yeah, there was some change in exactly how their economy worked.
Isn't that interesting that you have your first world empire in 600 BC with Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon? The books today, I tell my folks, I'm very concerned. They're no longer really books about science. They're actually books about evolution.
Well, that being a part of science, that makes sense.
It seems like somebody wants to use our school system to teach their philosophy to the next generation. I think I know why. We'll get into lots more of this later. But our founding fathers in this country had a slogan: life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Now, what on earth is that?
Well, basically, it was a way to be somewhat less crass than the French Revolution, whose cry was, well, actually, and a lot of kind of sort of pro-freedom and democracy, where it was life, liberty, and property were the actual thing. And so the idea behind property and pursuit of happiness in both cases is basically that you allow people their own rights and their own property so that they can use those things to make their life what they want of it, rather than constantly interfering with them. It's one of the reasons why in the very early days, there essentially were no federal taxes on individual Americans. essentially all federal taxes were tariffs on foreign goods, and also occasionally requests for donations from the states. Yeah, it was together with that. And basically, the Founding Fathers just thought that pursuit of happiness sounded better than just the word property.
Define that, please. Really, it's tough to put a picture to that.
No, I'm just going to take a drink because Kent's just dumb.
The real original slogan was life, liberty, and property.
Oh, hey, you got that right. Take a drink.
Ownership and control of your property. That's essential to freedom. But they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Rights that you can't put a lien against.
No, take a drink for bad etymology.
That's a terrible joke. That's what that is.
I don't think that's a joke, but even if it is, I'm taking a drink because it still didn't land. It's not unalienable, it's unalienable. A lien against a right means that under certain circumstances and in certain times, someone, usually the government, can take away your use of a particular right because it serves some very important function. Some of the most common liens that the government puts against your rights are liens against property rights, where normally you would have exclusive right to the use of your property, but for some vital instance, maybe they have a lien against your property so they can use part of your property to move elements, say, of an army training unit through to get to some area. You can't really stop them. They generally will give some kind of compensation, but not always. And the lien stays with the property even if it's transferred. That's a lien. And in fact, you can put liens against people's rights. That is the whole point of liens existing. Unalienable means you cannot fundamentally take a right away from a person. So, when you talk about life, liberty, and property, it basically means that outside of penalty for crimes, which, again, liens are not, outside of penalty for crimes, you simply cannot deprive someone of their freedom, their life, or their property. That is what an unalienable right means. You cannot take it away from a person. A person has it simply by virtue of existing. Now, are rights unalienable? That's a matter for another day, and probably a different channel. But that is what unalienable rights means. It's not unalienable, or unalienable, or whatever. It's unalienable.
For instance, do you have the right to breathe?
Sure.
Where does this right come from? From God, right? You have to...
there are non-theistic natural right accounts, and even if you don't want to go with natural right accounts, you can still come up with government granting systems where you still end up with certain basic rights, just in general. And then again, you can also go with a non-rights-based ethical system, of which there are plenty. Utilitarianism is not a rights-based system, and even strict consequentialism, or not consequentialism, what am I thinking of? There are versions of Kantianism that aren't strictly rights-based, basically. Now, rules consequentialism can be turned into a rights-based ethical system. In rules consequentialism, rather than in any given case coming up with what you think is most likely to result in the greatest good for the greatest number, instead you think about what kind of rules would a society use in order to reliably get to that outcome overall. And then you follow those rules in each case rather than trying to figure out in each individual case what the exact right answer is. And so it takes a step a little bit removed from sort of the more standard consequentialism. But that can end up with rights, because if in fact in the final calculation, the most good for the most people ends with rules that effectively establish certain rights for people, then those people have those rights even under a rules utilitarianism system. So yeah, you don't have to resort to God just to end up with rights.
Get a permit to do that? No. You have the right to get married. Who gives the authority to get married? God does.
I mean, that's literally never been the case. So I'm going to take a drink, and then we're going to go a little bit into the history of marriage. So in every civilization where we have a good account of marriages have always primarily been a legal thing. They are a legal way to establish things like, inheritance, to tie families together, to create joint property between married couples, and things like that. Now, they then often accrued religious significance, mostly because in most civilizations, religion and the government weren't exactly separate things. And so, if you wanted to have a governmental attachment to someone, you would go to the temple to do it. But it is not the case that marriage has always been, or has primarily been throughout history, a religious function. It has always been primarily a civil function. And the reason for that is it is in the interest of the state, generally speaking, to keep families more or less intact and to have an orderly transfer of inheritance. And both of those things are facilitated by marriage, where you say this person and this person are now legally recognized as being in the same family, and any children produced from this marriage are legal heirs, and failing children produced, there can be things like adoptions would then bring that person legally into that family as the legal, if not biological, child of the couple. So it's just not true that marriage has always just been this solely religious thing. Now, I think in the modern world, there are some arguments as to why it's no longer terribly important, since we've pretty much gotten rid of ideas that you have to leave things to your biological descendants, and that it basically now exists as like a tax gimmick in most countries, and also as an obvious next of kin for like medical rights. But we could just change those things and solve those problems, and then get the government entirely out of your love life. But hey, whatever.
About 100 years ago, some people got tricked into getting state permission to do something God already said they could do.
Oh, so that's why Ken Hovind only legally divorced his first wife, and he's now gone through ex-wives 2 and 3 without ever actually getting legally married to any of them but the second one, and not actually divorcing either of them. Which, by the way, ladies, Kent Hovind is currently looking for ex-Mrs. Hovind number 4, so feel free to go down to Alabama and apply.
Is that confirmed?
Yeah, his third wife has left him.
Okay.
Yeah, she's no longer on the compound. Cindy Lincoln is gone.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, I'm sure she's in a better place now, which does not mean that I think that Kent Hovind killed her and buried her in the lake where that boy drowned.
Away from him.
Right.
Congratulations, ma'am. I'm glad you got
There
out.
was no such thing as a marriage license until about 100 years ago.
I don't actually know when the origin of the formal document, the marriage license, came about. But yeah, marriages have always been a thing that's been recognized by the state. It's just that in many cases, getting married in a church was enough. And plus, you also had common law marriages, where if you just lived together as a married couple for long enough, the state just declared you married.
Marriage licenses have been required since 1639 in Massachusetts.
Oh, well, take a drink then, because that's a lot longer than 100 years ago, even when this was put out.
I'm not even good at Googling things, and I found it that quickly.
All right. Also, go Massachusetts? I don't even know. I don't actually think marriage licenses are a good or necessarily bad thing. It's just a thing. But hey, Kent was super wrong about it.
For those of you who don't know, at the time of the video that we're making now, 1639 was way more than 100 years ago.
Yes. Because
If
otherwise...
you're watching from the past, if you're a time traveler somehow, well, I don't know. Depends on when you are.
Well, Manny Karen says that he could see himself as the next Mrs. Hovind, though he'd rather have Eric. Well, I'll say this. I don't think that Kent is open right now to marrying a man, primarily because of his target demographic. My guess is that if he married a man, he would end up in some seriously hot water with the people who pay his bills.
Probably.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize that a marriage license is a contract between you and your husband or wife and the state.
Kind of, yeah.
You don't have to get a marriage license. Now, if you want to get one, they'll be glad to sell it to you. But you don't have to get one.
I mean, that's technically true, so I guess I'll drink for it. You don't have to go get a marriage license. If you go get a religious ceremony, then live together in most states after a certain number of years, which varies, and this also is true in most places that just follow British common law. That's going to be basically all of the Commonwealth countries, so, you know, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, whatnot. Generally speaking, common law marriage is a thing, and if you live with someone for long enough, the state will treat you as having been married, despite the fact that you don't have a marriage license, you didn't register anything with the state. So, yeah, it's technically the case.
But our founding fathers had a totally different philosophy. They thought that rights came from God, and they're unalienable. You can't put a lien against them.
Yeah, I'm taking a drink for that again.
If you get a bunch of folks together who believe that, they don't make good slaves. They're going to throw the tea in the harbor and rebel against King George.
I guess,
eventually.
yeah, true. Take a drink.
So, suppose you and a few hundred of your super rich gazillionaires decided you're going to have meetings a couple times a year and discuss how can we control the entire world.
Aha! Marriage licenses. That's how.
That's enough. Evolution, too.
I just love the implication right now that marriage licenses are a huge part of, like, the Illuminati or whatever's control mechanism. It's like, we can make them all into obedient slaves under our control if we just make them get a marriage license. Like, dude, come on. These sinister...
Satan's plan this whole time.
Right. My goodness, that is such a lame plan.
We would like to have us, the smart guys, be the rulers of the world, and everybody else be our rice farmers, our slaves.
Little point of trivia, actually, while slavery in the United States is primarily associated with cotton in the popular imagination, large portions of slaves in western areas, still just east of the Mississippi, were actually working on rice fields. And so, yeah, that was actually a huge portion of agricultural slave use in the Americas. It's not really related to what he's talking about here, but it is something I think a lot of people kind of stereotype American slavery. Yeah, and so I don't think that makes it any better or particularly worse, but it is the case that yes, a lot of slaves in the United States ended up working on what were essentially rice plantations instead of cotton.
Now, in Egypt, when Joseph became the ruler of Egypt, what percentage of the profits did he take away from the people? Anybody remember?
I don't.
What was their tax in Egypt? 1/5. That's 20%. You know how much of your income goes to taxes in America?
Bob Knob just says, I checked my marriage license. The brain control implant clause is in the fine print. Man, if only you'd read it and realized you shouldn't get a marriage license. You should just get a common law marriage after a few years. Darn it.
Today? 45 to 50%. The slaves in Egypt were better off than we.
I just did my taxes. I didn't pay anywhere close to 45 to 50%. How about you, Ben?
No. It wasn't nearly that close.
No. In fact, a lot of people pay a negative tax when all is said and done. And yeah, look, there are people who are paying very high percentages in their taxes. And it's a different discussion as to whether or not that's appropriate. But most people are not paying anywhere close to 40 to 50% of their money in taxes.
Well, about 1/6 or so, something like that.
Yeah.
1/5, I don't know.
They only took 1/5. Throughout the scriptures, you see that where 10% belongs to God and 10% or 20% max would go to the government. You got to have taxes for certain things. I understand all that, and I pay lots of taxes, okay? But
this is before he went to prison for not paying taxes. I'm taking a drink because that's hilarious.
Maybe you pay lots of them, but you don't pay enough of them.
He pays lots of sales tax. I'll give him that. My goodness, that's. Oh, sorry, I did not know that line was coming, and I'm having trouble recovering from that one.
Let's rewind it back and do that one again.
No, we have to keep going. That's amazing.
we have gone crazy in this country because a super rich club of real smart guys have been meeting for years trying to develop a system of controlling the world's finances. And one of the key ingredients in getting a one world government, which the Bible prophesies will come.
Does it really, though? I mean, if you take Revelation as a prophecy about the end times, which there's good reason to think is not how it was intended to be taken, maybe kind of, but look, it's pretty iffy if that's actually what the Bible's predicting.
One of the key ingredients is you have to get people believing there is no creator. They have to think rights come from the government. And probably most of us in this room, believe it or not, already have an awful lot of that philosophy built into us. When you go to get married, you think, oh, I got to go get a marriage license. Now, why do we think that?
Because it comes with tax advantages, and if you don't have the marriage license, they can't just apply for them until eventually count as being in a common law marriage. And even then, the IRS might try to check into on it, and that would be a hassle. So it's easier, since one of the only reasons to get married at this point is for the tax benefits, to just get the marriage license.
When a baby's born, you think, I got to get a birth certificate.
Yeah, because it's important for medical records as well as getting a social security card and whatnot, and you kind of need one of those in order to do things like get jobs.
Why would you think something like that?
To recognize right to remain married.
Mostly mimetic psychopath asks, isn't the final civilization of Daniel clay and iron, meaning fragmented and not one world government? That's certainly a reasonable interpretation. Oh, my goodness. Something upset with the dogs. Yeah. Anyway, that's certainly a reasonable interpretation. I'm not going to sit here and say exactly what Daniel means. Ah.
It's created by the government, so it's necessary for that. The right to claim your kids to the government for the taxes. Now, you can argue the taxes.
Understand, right.
But once you buy into the process, like you don't need a driver's license to drive a car, you do on roads that are basically built by the government.
This opens up a whole can of worms of who gives authority to do what, and what are you going to buy into? If you want to use the Federal Reserve System's money, I mean, if you,
which, by the way, Kent does. Kent definitely uses the Federal Reserve System money.
you want to use their money and use their banks, see, that's not real money. This is paper, okay?
All right, I'm taking a drink. Okay, look. I did well enough in my macroevolution class that I got to skip the final. Now, does that mean I have an economics degree? No. But does it mean I know the basics of macroeconomics? Yes. Money is, by definition, the most fungible asset in the economy, and it is the store of value, the unit of exchange, and, like I already said, the most fungible asset. Federal Reserve-backed money is the money of the United States and several other countries. It just is. Now, you can make arguments about whether or not your money should be fiat or backed by some other actual commodity that you can exchange it for that has some kind of practical use. Whatever, I don't care. Federal Reserve fiat dollars are money in the United States because they are the unit of account, a store of value, the unit in which prices are measured, and the most fungible asset in the economy. That's what it takes to be money. That's what they are. Yeah, it's just paper with lines on it, says Cheshire Vic. That's true.
So if you decide you want to use their system, then you have to buy into lots of things. If you want to get a loan at the bank, they may say, well, we require 2 years of tax returns. There's no law that says that. That's a bank policy.
Yeah, because they want to know how much you're making. I mean, I'm taking a drink because that's, again, we're just being incredibly stupid about economics, which not super surprising. Okay, so a bank is on the hook if you don't pay them. That's why you had to do things like prove that you're not a credit risk to them. That's why you had to do things like put up assets as collateral, which they will then take ownership of if you default on the loan and whatnot. Otherwise, you would have banks in the situation of basically having just guys off the street be like, hey man, can I have 10 grand? And then what are they going to say? They're going to say no to everyone. Now, look, do I think that banks in the United States right now are operating in the best and most ethical way that is possible for banks to operate? No. But on the other hand, you cannot simply disallow banks from assessing credit risks. If you did, they would just simply stop loaning money, and instead they would just turn into vaults where they would charge you a fee to store your money. Now, that's a perfectly legitimate business in my opinion. I think a vault is a fine business to run, but that's not what most people want, I don't think. I think people want credit to be available, and I think people generally would like to be able to store their money for free. And banks provide those things, generally. So yeah, that is one of the reasons why tax returns work, because they are something that you've already sworn to under penalty of perjury, or penalty of law, I guess. I don't know if it's actually technically perjury, but under penalty of law, that these things are accurate. And the government has said, yeah, this seems accurate to us too.
And the banks are an arm of the International Monetary Fund, and it all ties together in a very complex web called The Matrix. If you saw the movie The Matrix, that's what they're talking about, this complex web.
I don't know if that was stupid or a joke, but either way, I'm drinking for it. My goodness.
That's a joke.
No one laughed at it, so.
And if you want to take the blue pill, you can just wake up in bed and just, go back to La La Land. But if you want to take the red pill and really understand it, we've got a video we've produced here called The Straw Man, which goes off into this topic and deals with lots of this, of how you can live just fine in this world without all their strings attached.
Okay, so that's where Kent Hovind gets into his sovereign citizen craziness. Like, as you know, or as you might know, he sued his son Eric Hovind in a sovereign citizen court, which his son apparently promptly just ignored, which is the right thing to do in that case. Yeah, Kent Hovind likes to say he's not a sovereign citizen because you can't be both a sovereign and a citizen. But that's just because he knows that there are, like, kind of negative associations with sovereign citizen nonsense. But he believes pretty much all the talking points of the sovereign citizens. So,
also, he doesn't literally sell oil from a snake.
That's true. That does demonstrate that he is not a snake oil salesman. Yeah. Kent Hovind is definitely sovereign citizen in all but name. And I'm going to go ahead and say, look, this isn't legal advice, but you should probably use US dollars if you're in the US, or your local fiat currency if you're in a country that uses them. You should probably pay your taxes, and you should probably get things like birth certificates and whatnot for your kids. Yeah. I'm just going to say that's going to make your life easier.
I've been doing it for a long time. You have to watch which way you walk once in a while, and be careful, because they're always trying to trap you back into the system.
Speaking of which, take another drink. That's hilarious. My goodness. From, like, looking back on this from 2021, it's, like, hard to believe how confident and unself-aware Kent Hovind was during this. So Many Karen asked if Kent is an incel. I mean, he has 3 children who no one has disputed are his biological children with his first wife. And presumably he was sleeping with a second wife. And the third woman he was calling a wife, probably. So I don't think so.
To the Matrix, but it can certainly be done. We don't advertise the video, but if you want to get it, it's in our... Heidi can get you one. $10 for the video. When you're done, you return it, get your money back. If you want to study this topic, it's a fascinating field of research. But our founding fathers would never have thought about getting a permit to build a building on their property.
That's probably true. Yeah, I'll take a drink. That's probably true. I'll bet if you told George Washington that he needed a permit to build, like, I don't know, a guest house or something on his land, he would just, like, I don't know, backhanded you or something. Yeah, that's probably true.
Their philosophy was, that's my property. I don't have to get your permission to do anything on my property.
That's not entirely true either. There were things that you were prohibited from doing on your property. There was a whole whiskey rebellion about it, Kent.
I mean, that's just the mentality they had. The Revolutionary War, one of the key ingredients was the Boston Tea Party, which was over a tax on the tea, and I believe it was 1% tax.
I don't remember how much it was, but it is important to note that that tea wasn't actually public property. I mean, it wasn't owned by the crown. It was, in fact, owned by a private company. Now, granted, a private company that was given a charter by the British crown and that more or less had a monopoly. So it was in a little bit of a weird place between private and public property, but it wasn't unambiguously public. That was someone's property. There was a guy whose money was invested in that tea who lost out big.
Something like that. It's nothing. And we've gone nuts. But I think
Okay, I'm going to take a drink because he's not going to go into the reason why this was actually objectionable to the American colonists. So if you look at all of the things written by the intellectuals who were, pushing for a change in the relationship between the colonies and the crown, their objection wasn't to the amount of taxation. It was primarily to the fact that they were being taxed without any representative in Parliament, but Parliament was the ones who were passing the legislation that allowed the taxation. Right? That's where you get the phrase "no taxation without representation." That's one of the reasons why some people in Washington, D.C. argue that if they're not going to actually have representatives in Congress, they shouldn't be subject to federal taxes. Yeah. So the objection wasn't that it was a 1% or a 5% or whatever percent tax it was. It was simply that they shouldn't be taxed without having representatives in the legislative body that was levying the taxes in the first place. That's why later on, the United States government and various state governments would go on to levy higher taxes without the same objections.
one of the major plans toward a new world order that Satan has is eliminating the belief in a creator.
Why? The thing is, you can arrive at all of Kent Hovind's favorite legal theories without a creator. You don't need a creator to come up with a natural rights idea and what Kent is advocating for here, which is sort of a broadly libertarian-ish government policy. You really don't need a god to do that. So, getting rid of belief in God is not going to make the political philosophy that Kent Hovind is here espousing untenable, right? It just isn't. In fact, famously, Ayn Rand had a similar political philosophy, and she was an avowed atheist.
And evolution is the great way to do that. And so early in the 1800s, they came up with a plan of how to control the world. The Illuminati did this back in 1776, even with Adam Weishaupt and their...
No, there's no evidence that the Illuminati lasted long enough to do anything like that. There just isn't. So I'm going to take a drink for Kent Hovind actually believing in the Illuminati. The thing that is basically the thing you make fun of creation, or what is it? Conspiracy theorists for believing, because it's so stupid.
Been modifications to the plan for several hundred years. And the group members change, but the group itself has kept a consistent goal of world dominance.
I mean, they've been doing a pretty crap job of it, but okay.
Through control of the currency. Right now, none of you have any money.
Again, wrong.
You have a Federal Reserve note, which is not money.
Again, no, it is. I'm taking a drink. Now, look, if you want to have economic discussions about the viability of fiat currency versus a commodity-backed currency, that's a perfectly fine conversation to have, and I think there are valid points in favor of each side. I'm not here to tell you which side I come down on, but I have heard good arguments from both sides. However, to pretend that because fiat currency is fiat currency, it isn't currency anymore, or isn't money, is completely wrong.
That's an IOU to the government. And silver and gold is real money, and we don't have any or much of that for sure. Long story. But I believe education was, first of all, public education was called for and planned as part of this major plan toward a one world government. They said, we're going to get a public education system, then we will secularize it, eliminate God, sanitize it of any mention of God, and teach the kids a philosophy that says, your right to breathe, and your right to work, and your right to drive, and your right to get married comes from the government.
No, actually, initial public schooling in the United States, which was originally run by states, and I'm focusing on the United States because both that's where I am and it's where Kent is, and it's what he's talking about. Your mileage may vary in your home country, but in the United States, public schooling actually started out pretty explicitly Christian. Then it sort of turned to sort of a vague civil deism, which is more or less what is effectively the state religion in the United States. It's sort of a bland, no real theology, monotheistic deism. But over the course of primarily the 20th century, numerous challenges on First Amendment grounds, First Amendment grounds, by various firms and the ACLU and whatnot, slowly edged out all of the explicitly religious parts of that. But it was not originally planned to be some kind of non-religious thing. Public schools originally were quite explicitly religious and pro-Christian, if not explicitly Christian in all the time.
And once you get this philosophy ingrained in them that the government gives, the government takes away, you know, everything comes and rises and falls on government. And believe me, we've got that philosophy here, don't we? Our country is saturated with it. So is most of the other world. But that is a major key ingredient in planning toward a one-world government.
How? Even if it were the case that people became unacceptably reliant on the government, they would presumably be unacceptably reliant on their local governments, and local governments have constraints, and it does not actually lend itself towards other governments just grouping together into one big government.
Which was Satan's plan all along. God's plan in the Bible, if you compare what God said in the Bible compared to what's happening, you'll see there are very many differences. They talked about every man having his own vine, his own fig tree, owning your own property. They had a system set up in Israel where if you lost your property because you were, poor management or whatever reason, you got it back.
Well, that is what's represented in the Torah. There's actually good reason to think that these years of Jubilee, which is what he's talking about, where every so often, I think it's every 7 years, property rights would return back to the families that had originally owned them. Yeah, there's good reason to think that was never actually practiced. And actually, there's good reason not to practice it in terms of actually just running an economy, because it basically means that you cannot sell property, you can only lease it. And your ability to actually immediately liquidize the capital value of your assets is tied directly to how long it is until the next year of Jubilee. So Kent Hovind's sort of libertarian-ish ideas here actually contradict the idea of a year of Jubilee.
50 years, called the year of Jubilee. Ownership of property is essential. And I think we've lost some of this basic philosophy.
But see, the year of Jubilee prevents you from fully owning property because it doesn't actually allow you to sell it. You can't sell it, you don't really own it under most ideas of property rights, because one of the things you can do with property is give it to someone else. That's one of the things you're free to do. But under biblical law, you're not. So whether or not it's a good idea, it's actually not property ownership in the strictest sense.
Philosophy of what does the Bible say versus what's happening around us. Now, because we're already using Federal Reserve notes and we're already using a Social Security number, the next step is very simple. If you want to continue getting our benefits, you come down and get a little microchip put in your hand or in your forehead.
Take a drink. My goodness.
That joke landed, but it's still stupid.
So Sticktalic says you actually agree with him on education. He said first create the system, then secularize it. But the problem is that there was no effort by the government to secularize it. It was all private efforts to actually object to what the government was doing. If it were just the government trying to slowly phase out religion, you would expect to see the government phasing out religion from public schools. They didn't, except under duress, essentially.
Or else you can't buy or sell. We're just a few steps away from that.
No, we're way more than a few steps, except, of course, that the Covfefe vaccine definitely has the mind control chip.
The chip's available right now. I've got a couple of chips in my office. You can get the chips right now.
Yes, RFID chips that are body safe do exist. But they're primarily used for pets. And some people have considered using them. Oh, Mothra. Take a drink from Mothra. There has been some consideration of using them for things like, elderly dementia patients and whatnot. But there has never, ever been even the suggestion of mandating that everyone get one if they wish to be allowed to enter into, economic transactions under the, auspices of the United States government or any other government. It's just not a thing. No one has even suggested it. But actually, we're going to take a quick break and go to our intermission while I, myself, refresh my drink. And I hope that you guys enjoy this quick little commercial break, if you will. And we will be right back in just a few minutes. So please enjoy the break and don't run away because we will be right back. I want to take a moment to talk about something serious. There is a problem facing late surviving non-avian dinosaurs in modern America. Hunting is very strictly regulated, and only allowed at certain times of the year. This means that for much of the year we have to rely on farm-raised food, which means money. If you want to help a starving dinosaur, please consider donating on Patreon, or buying from my merch store. Links are in the description. Please help. Dinosaurs all over YouTube are depending on you to help them through the hunting off-season.
Oh, Nani? Dare? Oh, Gojira desu ka? Hai, Gojira-san. Hai.
All right, we are back, and we come back to a $10 super chat from Emotionally Mimetic Psychopath, who says, "Here's some cash for my recent paycheck, you poor dinosaur." Thank you very much. It is greatly appreciated. You guys, your support, becoming channel members, patrons, super chatting, that is by far the majority of the money that this channel makes. Ads are basically nothing. The only reason I even put ads on my videos is because YouTube would downgrade me in the algorithm if I didn't. Honestly, ads are essentially nothing. I've checked like how much I make on ads versus other things, and it's I'm not even sure it makes up 5% of what this channel brings in. So yeah, ads are essentially worthless. So thank you very much, all you guys who, you know, it really is the case that you guys who super chat, who join the channel, who become patrons, you are what allows this channel to continue to exist. Because, quite frankly, I spend too much time on it for it to not make anything, so, yeah. Anyway, here comes more Kent.
That's not hard. Somebody told me a few months ago that 75,000 Americans already have one of the chips.
I doubt it, but okay.
Interesting. Yeah, come get a chip. Go to the store, pick up all your groceries, and walk out. Automatically deducts it out of your account.
I mean, now they can just do that with cell phones. Are cell phones the new mark of the beast?
In the right hand or the forehead?
I mean, I hold my cell phone in my right hand often. So, I mean, I don't know.
By that little chip when you go through the archway, the sensors. It's coming, folks, okay? Our job as Christians is to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves.
I like how Satan's evil plan is to make it more convenient for you to pay for your groceries. That's... Woo! Apparently, according to Ken Hovind, Satan's big plan is to make it really, really easy for people to check out of the grocery store. Good for him, I guess.
You know, to walk carefully in this crooked and perverse world that we're living in. And I want you to see, one of the reasons for this great age for the earth propaganda is to draw kids away from believing in the Bible. There's a great video called Let My Children...
Did we just get a jump cut?
That was pretty awful.
The thing that surprises me about it is that these things are so poorly edited that I'm surprised that anyone ever bothered to cut out whatever that was. So, yeah, that was weird. And also, do please hit like, because I'm noticing that less than half of you have hit like. And of course, I like less than half of you half as much as you deserve. Oh, and Dr. Truth became a new channel member. Welcome to Tetrapod. Thank you very much. So, all of my channel members, let's send him some Kent Hovins, followed by some Dapper Dinos with the emojis.
Go. That says 75% of all children raised in Christian homes who attend public schools reject the Christian faith by the end of their first year of college.
I mean, that sounds like a problem for you, Kent. That sounds like something you should probably work on.
Jeremiah Films put it out. Why on earth would 75% of the kids reject the faith? Well, because if you just sat down and read the Bible, you would come up with the idea that the earth is about 6,000 years old.
I actually don't think you would. I don't know anyone who has, without prior knowledge of young earth creationism, read the Bible and come to that conclusion. Mostly because even if that conclusion is derived at by taking the genealogies literally, I'll be honest, people who just approach the Bible naively tend not to pay too much attention to the genealogies.
Look, I was so nerdy, and even I didn't actually add the numbers up, but I almost did. I was like, it's just too much work.
Venerable Beat actually asks an interesting question. He says, wait, Dapper Dan, do I have to pay to become a member if I'm already a patron? So unfortunately, Patreon and YouTube channel memberships are completely separate. I have similar tiers for both, and they have essentially the same benefits, except that I don't have a way to let my patrons become channel members with access to the emojis and the special color in chat and whatnot. I just don't. Which means if that's really something you want to do, is have the emojis, what my recommendation would be is get like the I think it's a $1.99 is the bottom tier membership for joining, or if you would prefer, just switch over on like the next billing cycle or something. I wish there were a way to combine them, but there isn't, and I have a bunch of people who prefer one platform over the other for various reasons. So I provide them both as an option. And for $5, Bob Knob says, it's almost like knowledge is at odds with evangelical beliefs. It is almost like that, isn't it? Although I will say, I have seen some differentiation between evangelical and fundamentalism, where evangelical beliefs wouldn't necessarily be at odds, but often are, and it's the fundamentalist, but I don't actually care enough about those distinctions. So, yeah.
That's the obvious teaching. And yet the schools are teaching it's millions of years old, and we evolved. Well, kids are going to go to church maximum 3, 4, 5 hours a week.
That is not a maximum. If Kent Hovind thinks that that's a maximum, that's just because he is in the wrong churches. I'm going to take a quick drink for that being stupid, and then go over some churchy things. Okay, so there are churches where the average week involves at least 3 days a week in church, usually adding up to several hours, and then frequent non-actual service, like not worship service, functions occurring at churches. One of the big groups there is the Jehovah's Witnesses. They can spend much more than that a week. And there are also churches where, while each week, 3 to 5 might be a reasonable high end, there are certain weeks where it's much, much higher. In fact, if you were to attend every single Holy Week service at, say, an Eastern Orthodox church, you would end up being in church for probably around 30 hours over the course of that 1 week. It basically is a full-time job at that point. Not quite, but almost. Because there are long services every day of that week. And by long, I mean they can go 4 to 5 hours. Yeah, so. And Bob Knob points out, growing up in a Southern Baptist church, we had church multiple times per week. So yeah, it can go a lot higher than 3 to 5 hours or whatever.
We're going to be in school 30 hours a week?
Yeah, like I said, that can be matched by some churches. Not necessarily all the time, but sometimes.
You tell me who's going to win. Plus, nearly 100% of the kids go to school, and less than 100% go to church.
I mean, true, so I'll take a drink. But the thing is, look, I have Christians in my audience who are theistic evolutionists, right? You don't have to make it so that public school teaching science is at odds with your religion. In fact, I know of at least one person, actually 2 people here with the wrenches, who are in fact Christians, who watch my channel, and who are not young earth creationists. So, there you go. And I actually don't know about everyone else. Many more of my mods might be Christian for all I know, because I don't particularly care whether or not you're a mod, and I happen to know that several of my viewers who aren't mods are in fact Christians. So, yeah. It's almost like you don't have to base your religion on defying science if you don't want to.
And that's what the humanists have counted on for years. We'll get into lots more on that when we get into what's on my videotape number 5 about how evolution is the root philosophy for communism, socialism, Marxism.
Okay, take drinks for a bunch of ideologies that, at least at first, explicitly rejected evolution.
That's so crazy, Kent. That's like almost as crazy as the Hovind theory.
Someday I should actually do a video on Lysenkoism, because Lysenkoism was this idea adopted by the Soviet Union and their satellite states that rejected evolution and said that in their natural state, organisms just cooperated with each other and like, hey man, let's just all get along. Because, the competitive nature of Darwinism was way too capitalist, and it was a way for the bourgeoisie to keep down the proletariat by saying that was part of the natural order. And as a result of Lysenkoist agricultural policies, the Soviet Union had numerous famines. Now, of course, even after they ditched Lysenkoism, they still had famines because they were really, really, really bad at running an economy. But they had fewer.
And how they've said all along, we're going to infiltrate the school system. John Dewey was one of the leaders of one of the teachers' colleges in Vermont. They turned out teachers with his philosophy of humanism. Those teachers ended up being deans and superintendents of school systems, which trained more teachers. And from 1930 until today, it's been a steady encroachment of getting humanist or communist-minded teachers into our school system. And we're saturated with them.
I mean, okay, I know a fair few teachers. A lot of people in my family are in the public school system, and I can tell you a few things. 1, they're not all atheists, and 2, none of them are communists. There you go.
And they're teaching this philosophy that of humanism, there is no God, government is the ultimate authority. I'm in favor of obeying the government. But I've got a higher authority yet. And if there's a conflict, I'm to obey God. All through the Bible, you see this principle.
I will say that is true. That is in the Bible, and I'll take a drink for it.
Does the Bible say don't pay your taxes?
No, actually, it does not say that. But, and I'll be honest, while you might argue with the divine command theory underlying it, I do think it's actually an important point to remember that legality doesn't equal morality. It's easy to find examples of things that were legal and were immoral, or things that were illegal to do but it was, or sorry, yeah, legal to do that were immoral, or legal to do, or even required by law to do that were immoral. It's really not hard to figure out. So I do think that there is something to be said for assessing laws from a moral standpoint and choosing whether or not and to what degree you will follow them on that basis. Now, I'm not currently advocating that you break any particular law, but what I am saying is if you think that morality and legality are the same, I think you would have a hard time defending that thesis. That's where I'll leave it.
In trouble because they obeyed the higher authority. They got beaten, stoned, killed, sawn in half.
Yeah, things like that can happen if you decide to defy a legal system because of your moral convictions. I mean, things have consequences, and I do think that there should be a more than coincidental connection between morality and the law, but in many cases there isn't, and it kind of sucks because it puts anyone who wants to stand by their moral principles between a rock and a hard place. But that being said, most laws in the United States don't require Christians to violate their ethics. In fact, I'm not really sure that I know of very many at all. I might be able to think of a few, but...
You name it, it happened to them because they had that philosophy. And the problem with Christians is we don't fit into the New World system very well because if you're a good Christian, that'll be your philosophy. I'll obey the government as long as there's no conflict between what God told me to do and what you're telling me to do. Christians make great citizens because their God tells them one of your jobs is to obey your government until there's a conflict. Then you obey me. The king says, bow down and kiss the idol. Sorry, I can't do that. Well, I'm going to throw you in the furnace. Well, okay, then throw me in the furnace. I'm just not allowed to do that. I have a higher authority. Okay, we covered lots on video number 1 about the age of the earth and how it affects people when they lose their faith, and we won't take time, we got to quit in a few minutes here, but Crawford Toy, a great Southern Baptist Seminary professor, almost married Lottie Moon. Anybody go to Southern Baptist Church here?
Apparently Bob Knob did. Bob, if you know who Lottie Moon is, let us know in the chat. Apparently she was a famous Baptist missionary to China, but I've never heard of her, so I don't know. But then again, why would I know about famous Baptist missionaries? I've literally never looked into any Baptist missionary in my life.
You've heard of Lottie Moon. Every Christmas they have the Lottie Moon offering. Used to, okay. Crawford was engaged to marry, I don't know if I think he was engaged to marry her. She broke it off because he lived in the late 1800s, same time she did. It's good to live same time, person you're going to marry. But
oh, that was a joke that didn't land. Take a drink.
he began to doubt the Bible over that question of how old is the earth. In the late 1800s, a lot of people were teaching the earth is millions of years old. And the Christians didn't really fight that. They accepted it. And they tried to incorporate it into the Bible with the gap theory and the day-age theory, and they just plain compromised. Well, Crawford said, the Bible intends to teach a plain 6-day creation. The Bible is simply in error. And if you start thinking the earth is millions of years old, you're going to have to either justify or allegorize the first 11 chapters of Genesis.
I'm just going to say, I think it's actually kind of sad that something this stupid broke off a marriage that otherwise apparently would have been just fine. Like, my goodness,
I don't know if it
who
would have been
cares?
just fine if this broke it off before that point.
Well, I guess, but like, okay, there's a few things. One, if your marriage or your relationship actually is a good relationship, and you break it off because like there's a couple stupid things that your significant other believes, maybe consider not doing that. But the other thing is, if you're in the kind of relationship that's going to break up because of something stupid, I guess maybe it wasn't a great relationship to begin with. So I don't know. It still kind of bothers me that is what ended that engagement.
I'll tell you what, if they had gotten married, they wouldn't still be married now.
That is true. I will give you that.
Many great preachers today will say, oh, the Bible's a wonderful book, and I believe it. Now, the first few chapters is probably an allegory, but the rest of it's great. That's what they do. Or they try to get rid of the first 11
chapters are an allegory, and all the rest of it's perfectly literal canon.
Yeah, that is a weird thing. Like, okay, I've said this before, and I'm apparently saying it again, and I'm sure I'll say it again later, but the Bible isn't a single work. It is a collection of works, each of which is different and some of which themselves are compilations of previous works. And the idea that you should interpret the entire, however many books, 66 for many Christians, but more for many more Christians, the idea that you should interpret them all with the same technique or hermeneutic is just crazy to me.
Chapters by saying, or they try to include evolution by saying there's a gap between verse 1 and verse 2, or that each day is not really a day, it's millions of years for each day. We'll get into those theories coming up soon, about the gap theory and the day age theory, and how they just simply are not true. But that'll all be covered on probably in the second course on this topic.
Which, by the way, yeah, there's a second course. This is only Creation Science Evangelism 101. Yeah, it keeps going after that. So buckle up, guys, because we've got plenty of Kent with Bent material to go.
Millions of episodes to come, or less.
Probably fewer because of count nouns. Grammar.
All right. Quiz questions. What do we got so far, Heidi, for next week? Not much, huh?
Okay.
2. We need to get a...
Oh. All right, well, I guess that is the end of this one, and I'll be honest, I didn't actually download the next one because I thought this one would take us longer. So, this will just be a shortish episode, guys. Sorry about that. But then again, it is our first episode back after a little bit of a hiatus, so I don't entirely mind. Let's see. So this Thursday, I will be releasing a mirror of the debate I had with Finding Truth. I don't know if there's going to be anything Saturday. And then next Tuesday, it's not clear to me what is going on. It might be Eric with Erica. It might be the cryptid tier list. It'll just kind of depend. I think I'm going to push for it to be the cryptid tier list since that was already what was scheduled. And I have at least one extra guest I would like to bring in. There you go. Oh, and Bob Knob says, we had Lottie Moon offerings in church occasionally. I don't know much about her other than she was a missionary and one of the biggest slave owners of the time. Okay, well... there you go. T. Lane says, do you mind if I ask a question before you go? I do not mind. So let's see. Thursday after that should be the video that I'm trying to finish up for next Thursday should be the video I'm trying to finish up tomorrow, which will be a look at a CMI article by John Sarfati and Robert Carter, who are just moronic.
And edited by nobody.
Yeah. Then after that, I'm hoping the next Thursday is the next update for the Spectre Evolution. I am at about the halfway point when it comes to the art for that, and I will hopefully get some more of that artwork done on Thursday. I'm hoping that between Thursday and Saturday, I can get at least 3 more creatures done. So Vandali 1998 for $5 says, in 45 minutes, Jackson and Walker will be talking about animals returning to the sea. I thought it would be right after, but it looks like we have time now. So there you go. Check out Vandali 1998 for that. That actually does sound like an interesting stream. TD Lane says, if you could put a dinosaur or extinct organism on any US dollar bill, which dinosaur or extinct organism do you choose on which dollar bill? I have absolutely no idea. I mean, any of them on any of them would be pretty cool. So I don't know. I mean, of course, I'm partial to Ceratosaurus. But also, you know, there's a lot of really cool... I would like to keep it to like a North American animal, so like Ceratosaurus would be cool. But also, there's a lot of cool like Cambrian things that I might put on there. There's a lot of cool American Pseudosaucians. Maybe even things like Eohippus or some of the adapted primates that were native to North America. That would also be cool. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm actually a fan of the ones you can see on occasionally, the bald eagles.
Well, they're not extinct.
Where it says a dinosaur.
Oh yeah, so I guess any dinosaur counts. So yeah, we already do have a fair few dinosaurs on money because bald eagles show up a lot. And of course, for $20 from Bob Now, thank you very much for your generosity. Go grab sushi on me. I appreciate that. I don't know if that's enough for me to actually effectively grab sushi, but it's definitely going to help in the general push towards getting sushi. So thank you very much, guys. I really do appreciate everyone who showed up. And we're going to play the end credit scene, and then we're going to get out of here a little bit early this time. And please, I do hope to see all of you on Thursday for my, it won't be live, but for my mirror of my debate. And then again, at least on Tuesday, for what I think I'm just now declaring is just going to be the cryptid tier list. And I'll tell you who my special guest is if I actually manage to get him on board for this. So without any further ado, unless, Ben, do you have something? Do you have anything to plug?
There's music. You guys know where it is. Coppermagma.com.
Yes, go to coppermagma.com. Do it.
It's free. Just download it.
Yeah, and it's good. In fact, it's the music that you hear at the beginning and end of most of my videos. So there you go. All right, well, in that case, thank you very much, everybody, and I hope I will see you on Thursday. I want to take a little time to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 or more. Bob Knob, Bent Hovind, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bead, Patrick Dennis, and Res Instance. YouTube is a very volatile platform, what with fraudulent copyright claims, demonetization, and the ever-decreasing share of ad revenue on the platform. It is very hard to rely on YouTube. My members and patrons help keep this channel going, and without them, the channel wouldn't exist. If you'd like to join my Patreon, the link is in the description, and if you'd like to become a channel member, that link is below the video. It's the join button here on YouTube. Either way, you'll get access to early videos, an exclusive Discord server, and if you pledge enough, 3D assets you can use in your own projects.